now! What is up, everybody? My name is Mike Brown, aka Review King MB. What the fuck?
Training with Sable paid off sooner than I'd hoped.
I just fought off hunters as Mary Jane? And I am here because I had to. I just had to talk about X-Men 97 and just how fucking good this show or series has been so far. It's not the entire season. I may come back once everything is all wrapped up, all said and good, because I was a huge fan growing up of X-Men the animated series. As a kid in the 90s, being able to watch a show like that, Spider-Man the animated series, Batman the animated series, these shows are a big part, a big reason for why I got into comic books, why I got into superheroes, and why I feel like I know as much shit as I do. First things first, the animation style. It's clearly up to date and it's clearly a more modern look, but I love how it's not too 3D animation. It still feels close enough to how the style of that original show was. Obviously, having the theme song, the original theme song, was a big plus. And I did see one tweet of somebody saying that this is just nostalgia bait, and this is just sort of feeding off of that lowest common interest in what the show originally had, and so it's not really as good as people are saying. It was only one take, so I'm not pretending like there's a whole huge turn on this, but I tried to watch it with that in mind to say, is this that good? And honestly, yes. Going forward, and when you see them bringing back the voice actors, yes, nostalgia is a big part of why I personally have enjoyed these episodes so far, but I do feel like there's more than that. For example, Cyclops is the leader. He feels like the leader. This show, the 90s show, is a big part of why I've always defended Cyclops as a character, why I've always championed him as the real leader. The movies, the live action films did not do the character justice, and so it was so refreshing. It was so nice to see Cyclops be put in this position, and it didn't feel forced. It felt natural. It felt organic. It felt like how it should be when he's the one giving the orders. He's essentially the Captain America of the group, right? And I thought, oh, that was great. The way how they use his power set, the I-beams. I mean, I can't get enough for how awesome they made all of that in the action-y type scenes. Jean Grey being pregnant is something that I'm enjoying as well, because in the original show, it was sort of the same stuff with Jean, especially when it came to the Phoenix stuff and just her not being in control of herself. And so it's nice to finally, almost for the first time, get to know her as a person, as a character, her thoughts on whether or not she even wants the baby to be a mutant or to be human because of just how much easier his life would be. I just really got into some of that character stuff with her. Storm. First of all, I love the Mohawk, but when you get first introduced in the first episode of how awesome Storm is, how badass she is, how alpha she is with her abilities, and just how much, if she shows up, if she arrives, and if she wants to go Omega level, she can do some damage. But then they depower Storm and take away her powers, and I was shocked by that. I was not expecting that. I don't know if it's because she's just so powerful that they felt like they had to depower the team in general. I do hope that we get more of her, and that's not all that we see of Storm. And another big story beat is Magneto joining the team. He's joining because Professor X sort of wanted him to. It was in his will, and so I'm loving that dynamic. I've always found Magneto to be a great villain, and so to see him still keep his ideologies of how he feels about humans and what he thinks mutants need to be, him pushing that aside because of how much he did love and appreciate Xavier's friendship and just how much that is sort of overtaking what he normally would do. It's a great dynamic. Obviously, the team not trusting him is something that I'm enjoying. So far, so great. I have nothing but praise to say about this show. I wanted to also take the time to talk about the 90s show because I've never really made a video talking about the 90s show. And I rewatched all 5 seasons in preparation for X-Men 97. And so I wanted to take the time right now to talk about this series and what I thought rewatching it. Jubilee is great. And I remember being younger and sort of talking about Jubilee and saying that I like her, but other people saying, no, she's lame as hell. Like, all she has is fireworks powers and whatever. She's lame. And I was like, no, she's cool, because especially in the show where she's a teenager, she's young. So as a kid, you're going to probably relate to her the most. And you get introduced to the team, into everything going on with the school through Jubilee's eyes. So that's, to me, makes her important. But I love the fact that she's a Chinese superhero. That's something that does not get appreciated enough. Even in this day and time, you don't see a lot of that. And so there's a lot of Jubilee that I like. Yes, maybe later on in the season, there's a lot of her being angsty. There's a lot of her sort of just having crushes on dudes. Rogue is another character that I think I ended up appreciating even more so rewatching it. Not just the southern accent, or apparently everybody thinks that Rogue's ass was the best cartoon ass of all time. There's some shots where I can understand that point of view, but I love the dynamic and the relationship of her and Gambit. For being a kid's show, they were able to toy that line of how much attraction they had for each other, but they couldn't physically be with each other. So that was an ongoing thing. But the whole backstory of her accidentally stealing Miss Marvel's powers, that episode of Carol Danvers is now in a coma because Rogue touched her for too long and absorbed her powers. Because at first, I thought, why does Rogue fly? Why does she seem so much stronger than I ever remember her before? And then that's the reason. It's because she has the powers and abilities of Captain Marvel. That blew my mind. And it made me feel really bad for the Miss Marvel character. Morph is a character that was specifically created for the 90s show. And going back and seeing how he was killed off in the first episode, presumably, comes back only to be turned evil by Mr. Sinister, and he constantly has this back and forth of not knowing where he belongs, not knowing, because he wants to rejoin the group but doesn't think he deserves to rejoin the group. And so there was a lot of good character stuff with Morph. And the current controversy, the reason, or one of the main reasons why people call the new X-Men 97 show woke, because I guess the creators or the showrunners have said that Morph is non-binary, meaning he's sort of whichever gender he wants to be. And that's wild that people are complaining about this. People are acting like the 90s show did not touch on issues of discrimination. I mean, you had constant scenes of large crowds out there with large signs saying, God hates mutants and mutants suck and they're terrible and get rid of them. And it's just like, what do you think the X-Men represented? What do you think the X-Men was about? Maybe you're mad because they're being a little more obvious about it, or they feel like they can use that a little more straightforward this time around, but I honestly don't see any difference from how they were presented back then versus doing stuff like that now. It makes absolute sense. Mr. Sinister, I sort of forgot how much of a villain he was for the X-Men because they've never done him in live action, which is kind of wild. But he would constantly show up, obsessed with Jean Grey, obsessed with Cyclops. I mean, this dude, it was kind of creepy how often he tried kidnapping people. Speaking of that, there was a lot of plots of kidnapping people. Almost every episode was either somebody gets mind controlled or somebody gets kidnapped. And so I found that to be quite hilarious. Other villains, you have Sabretooth, who obviously has this big connection to Wolverine. And so that was very important and made him a good threat. But I found it funny how you always had this reveal with certain villains and certain characters that they were always the brother of somebody or the father of somebody related to somebody. Like Cyclops' father ended up being one of their adversaries at one point. It was sort of a twist. And I'm like, everybody's related to somebody. Juggernaut is the stepbrother of Professor Xavier. I'm like, my God, people. Mystique is the mother of so many characters. Other villains that I probably definitely did not appreciate or knew who they were when I first saw this. But now, seeing the High Evolutionary show up, who was just in Guardians of the Galaxy 3, but he was in a standalone episode. Kilgrave showing up here as the Purple Man. That blew my mind. I was like, holy crap, and he's mind controlling kids. It was really messed up. Professor X, something I noticed is that Professor X falls in love with a lot of different characters. I used to think that about Wolverine, that he has a lot of love interest, especially because of how long he's been alive, and that's still true. But Professor X, every other season, there's a new long lost love that Xavier. This dude was a pimp, and I'm a little jealous of how often this dude, even while in a wheelchair, was able to get around and be with all these women. Now, speaking of Wolverine, I liked how his character was sort of portrayed, as far as there's a reason why people connect to Wolverine or want to know more about Wolverine, because he is so guarded, because he is so protective of showing his feelings, showing his emotions. He has his moments of getting angry and not being able to always control that. The one episode where he just bounces and goes to Japan, I love that. And sort of him just trying to find himself. There was even one episode where Moira McTaggart's son was sort of losing control of his powers, and he turns Wolverine into like a puddle. Wolverine comes back and starts bawling his eyes out. I said, holy crap, this guy, the big tough guy, just sort of got turned inside out, and to see him break down like that was fascinating. The love triangle, obviously, between Wolverine, Jean Grey, and Cyclops. I am surprised that it's obviously a big part of like the first season and sort of gets brought up every now and again, but it wasn't the whole focal point of his character. I appreciated that, because I feel like the movies just kind of make Wolverine seem like a dick with how he kind of just steals Jean away from Cyclops in a lot of ways. Where here, it's just, he'll always have that unrequited love. He'll always have that, the person he can never be with, but he accepts the fact that she's happy with Cyclops. So I like that very much. There was a surprising alternate timeline episode with the character Bishop, who anytime Bishop showed up, I said, all right, cool, we're going to get some time travel or some future shit. So I love that. But there was an alternate future where Wolverine and Storm was a couple. And I said, hell yeah, make that a thing. I forever, talking about the movies, said that why doesn't Wolverine just date Storm? She's hot as hell. She's single. she's right there. So I like that the show at least teased a possibility of that being an outcome. I mentioned before the Dark Phoenix saga, and as much as I appreciate it, as much as I think it's a fascinating situation to put the characters in, and to have Jean turn bad, and had to have Scott, Cyclops, for example, deal with the loss of her, even though she comes back. The whole thing is kind of convoluted. The whole thing is like, what? The whole alien entity, like I forgot the details exactly of how this happens. And the whole space aspect of it, the alien army who wants her dead, and just the constant in and outs of how often Phoenix comes back and goes away and then turns back good. I'm just like, no wonder why the live action movies didn't know what the fuck to do, and no wonder why they changed it and just made it like an alternate personality. I used to shit on the movies so much for changing that, and now looking back, I'm like, okay, it's still not good the way they did it, but I at least understand why they changed it, because there's a whole lot going on there. Magneto, obviously, is one of the best villains that you can ever deal with, just because of his friendship, his past friendship with Charles, and how that every so often puts them in situations where he is willing to work with Xavier. He is willing to work with the X-Men when he has to, or when he feels like things are going too far. Nightcrawler was one of those characters that when he popped up, I loved the religious aspect to his character. I mean, I'm not religious, but just seeing a mutant that looks like him and that sort of has that reaction to other people who see him, the fact that he can still be so spiritual and still be so positive and still try to always do what's right, I found that to be one of the best qualities of his character. I noticed how there was other characters that showed up, like Cable, like Colossus, like Iceman, who was one of the original members that was sort of the rebel who just bounced, took off. I wish we kind of got more of him. And there was a couple times where either Morph, would turn into this character, or there was like a flashback of Wolverine having some knowledge of Deadpool. They don't get into Deadpool at all, or he doesn't show up at all, but there was a couple times where like Morph turned into Deadpool for like a second and then turned back, and I'm like, what the fuck? Clearly Deadpool wasn't that popular or wasn't really all that fleshed out probably, but I wish they went into that way more, or just what the character meant at that point in time to Wolverine. I love the fact that so many episodes had cliffhangers, so watching this on Disney Plus or rewatching the 90s show, it just made me feel like I gotta fucking watch the next one. I forgot how much each episode played into the next with the plots. It wasn't a lot of standalone episodes. Most of the 90s show is, you kind of gotta watch it from the beginning, because you might get lost if you try to jump into like season 3 or 4 at any point. The island that had the dinosaurs with the T-Rex I thought was hilarious, because probably a big reason why I'm obsessed with T-Rex as a dinosaur in general. And the episode where Wolverine teams with Captain America was one of my favorites, because it was probably the point where I first learned about Captain America, was watching this cartoon and seeing them fight Red Skull. Just all of that. I mean, I don't know if I thought all that highly of Captain America back when I was a kid, but now, since I appreciate him so much from the MCU, it made me love that much more. There was an episode in season 5 that kind of blew my mind, of this whole alien invasion thing that happened, right? It was this virus tech thing that came to Earth and sort of infected people, and it was trying to take over the world, and it was turning everyone into itself, and it was some weird, like, The Thing level of a horror film, at least premise-wise. I love that Beast was the lone kind of X-Men character to solve all that, but that tripped me up a lot. And Professor X dying in the finale, I don't think I remembered that at all until I rewatched this and said, wow. I mean, I guess technically he didn't die. He sort of just, he kind of dies, but then gets taken. So I don't know if that plays into the 97 show, if we will revisit that, if we will bring the character back in a new body. I wouldn't be surprised, knowing Professor X and his history from the comics and whatnot. So guys, I'm clearly all in on this X-Men stuff. I've been rewatching it for weeks and weeks now. Let me know in the comments below, not only what do you think of X-Men, the 90s animated series, just in general, what do you think, what's some of your favorite episodes, but also 97, how are you enjoying this so far? Are you loving it as much as I am? Thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Later!